Everyone at the 1969 Keeneland sale saw a horse destined for nowhere, a yearling with a crooked right leg, awkward and unwanted, sold for just $1,200, loose change in racing's elite world. Shipped off to Venezuela as an afterthought, Cannonball II would find himself up against not only grueling training, but outright mockery from America's top stables. So how did this rejected cripple end up changing the Kentucky Derby forever? The answer begins with the moment he was dismissed, and what happened after, nobody else was watching. At the Keeneland sale in September 1969, the auctioneer's gavel came down on a colt that almost nobody wanted. The sale ledger recorded the price, $1,200. In a world where blue-blooded yearlings regularly fetched 5 or 6 figures, this sum barely registered. A throwaway bid for a horse that had already drawn sidelong glances and quiet snickers from the crowd. The colt's right foreleg was visibly crooked, his stance off balance, his walk described by one onlooker as more crab than thoroughbred. Buyers and agents, trained to spot future champions, saw only risk and disappointment. The horse was bred in Kentucky by E.B. Benjamin, out of a mare named Dixieland Titu, which Benjamin had tried to sell twice before the foal even hit the ground. The dam's reputation and the colt's awkward conformation made for a combination that spelled trouble in the eyes of American horsemen. Bloodstock agents circled, glanced at the colt's bent knee and splayed hoof, and moved on. In the ring, the auctioneer struggled to drum up interest. The bidding stalled almost as soon as it began, and when the hammer fell, it landed in the hands of an agent acting for a Venezuelan buyer, Luis Navas, representing Pedro Baptista back in Caracas. This was not the kind of transaction that made headlines. Sale records from that day show Cannonball II's price was the lowest ever paid for a future Kentucky Derby winner at Keeneland. In the eyes of the American racing establishment, the colt was a reject, marked down and exported, a living reminder that pedigree and promise don't always walk hand in hand. The crooked leg that had turned away every serious bidder now set him on a new path, far from the bluegrass pastures of Kentucky. For the Venezuelan buyers, $1,200 bought not just a horse, but a chance, one that came wrapped in skepticism and low expectations. Cannonball II's journey was about to begin, not on the tracks of Churchill Downs or Belmont, but in the heat and dust of Caracas, where a different kind of horseman was willing to look past the flaws that had blinded everyone else. At La Rinconada racetrack in Caracas, Cannonball II entered a world far removed from Kentucky's manicured paddocks. The facilities were modest, the resources thin, but trainer Juan Arias saw something in the colt's awkward frame that others had missed. Instead of trying to correct Cannonball's crooked gait, Arias focused on building what the horse did have: heart, lungs, and a stubborn will to keep running. The regimen was relentless by American standards. Cannonball II raced often, facing older horses and tackling longer distances than most 3-year-olds would ever see before a classic campaign. 11 starts before the Derby, with multiple races at a mile or more, forced the colt to develop deep reserves of stamina. Where American prospects were kept fresh and lightly raced, Arias pushed for toughness. The Caracas climate added another layer of challenge. Horses worked through heat and humidity, galloping over deep dirt that demanded more from every stride. Arias believed that these conditions, punishing as they were, forged a horse that could outlast rivals bred for speed alone. He preferred long, steady gallops, sessions that built endurance rather than dazzling clockers with short bursts. There was no attempt to hide Cannonball's flaws. The focus was simply on making him as fit as possible for whatever came next. Central to this preparation was the partnership between Arias and jockey Gustavo Avila. The two men spoke the same language, not just in words, but in their shared understanding of the horse's rhythm. Avila knew that Cannonball II was most comfortable settling near the back, waiting for the right moment to strike. Together, they rehearsed late surges, trusting the colt's ability to unwind a powerful, sustained run when others began to tire. This was not a strategy born of desperation. It was a calculated use of Cannonero's strengths, refined through countless mornings at La Rinconada. The trust between trainer and rider grew with each race. Avila, already a top jockey in Venezuela, learned to ignore the noise from the stands and the skepticism from American observers. He listened instead to the horse beneath him and to Arias, who insisted that their colt could stay the Derby distance and beyond. Every hard-fought victory in Caracas, every grueling gallop in the tropical sun, became another layer in Cannonero's armor. By the time the team prepared to leave for the United States, they carried with them not just a horse, but a bond, and a conditioning edge that few in the racing world understood or respected. The journey ahead would test every bit of that foundation. Departure from Caracas was supposed to be a straightforward affair. Instead, Cannonero 2's journey to Kentucky became a test of endurance before the real race ever began. The team loaded the colt onto a chartered plane, only to face a mechanical failure that forced an abrupt return to the tarmac. Not once, but twice, the transport broke down. Each aborted flight left Cannonero 2 standing in the hold, nerves fraying, sweat building under the heat of the Venezuelan sun. When a replacement cargo plane finally became available, the horse was squeezed in alongside crates of chickens and ducks, a far cry from the pampered travel arrangements expected for a Derby hopeful. Touchdown in Miami brought no relief. Lacking the right paperwork, Cannonero 2 spent nearly 12 hours confined on the plane, the Florida heat turning the metal fuselage into an oven. By the time US officials sorted out the red tape, the colt was dehydrated and anxious. Quarantine regulations demanded another 4 days in a holding barn, isolated from the outside world. The stress of confinement and unfamiliar surroundings took a visible toll. Cannonero 2 dropped an estimated 70 pounds, his coat dulled, and raw patches appeared along his skin. Once cleared, the ordeal was far from over. A 1,000-mile trailer haul stood between Miami and Churchill Downs. The van rattled north along highways and back roads, the team inside running on adrenaline and exhaustion. Trainer Juan Arias and groom Juan Quintero watched over their charge, tending to him through rest stops and long stretches of darkness. Each mile added to the strain. The colt arrived in Louisville on the Monday before the Derby, just 5 days before the starting gate would open. Cannonero 2 stepped off the trailer looking nothing like a champion. Ribs showed through his coat, patches of hair were missing, and his eyes betrayed fatigue. The team, speaking little English, struggled to explain themselves at the stable gate. Security hesitated, unsure what to make of the disheveled group and their battered horse. Only after a flurry of paperwork and phone calls did they secure a stall. The American racing world would soon see the results of this journey, but for now, Cannonero 2 and his handlers had survived a gauntlet that would have broken lesser teams. Their resilience, forged in the chaos of transport and quarantine, became the quiet foundation beneath the coming storm. Word spread quickly around Churchill Downs. Cannonero 2 arrived looking like a cautionary tale. Ribs showing, coat patchy, skin raw from the ordeal of travel. Stable hands whispered about the horse that had come all the way from Venezuela, but not in admiration. American trainers sized him up and laughed, some calling the Venezuelan team amateurs, others muttering about the clowns who thought they could crash the Derby with a horse that looked more like a rescue case than a champion. The press circled, notebooks ready, but most wrote him off before he ever set hoof on the track. Headlines labeled him a mystery, a field filler, a foreign curiosity who had never faced real competition. Reporters pointed to his crooked right foreleg and the way he moved, awkward, almost sideways, nothing like the polished contenders from Kentucky or New York. In the mornings, Cannonero 2 jogged quietly on the backstretch, ignored by the clockers. When he posted a slow workout, the local scribes pounced. One columnist joked that the only thing faster than Cannonero 2's gallop was the rate at which bettors would lose money on him. Another described his team as lost in translation, their routines and equipment the subject of open ridicule among the old guard. Even the stable gate had been reluctant to admit them. In the eyes of the American racing elite, the Venezuelans were out of their depth, and their horse was living proof. On the betting boards, Cannonero 2 was invisible. He did not earn his own line. He was buried in the mutual field, lumped together with 5 other no-hopers. For those who cared to look, advanced betting markets overseas and in Las Vegas had offered odds as long as 500 to 1. A $2 bet on Cannonero 2 was seen as little more than a joke, a way for dreamers and Venezuelan expats to buy a sliver of hope. The real money stayed with the Blue Bloods, Bold Reason, Jim French, and Eastern Fleet. The idea that a horse from Caracas, trained on a shoestring and battered by travel, could beat the best 3-year-olds in America was dismissed out of hand. As Derby Day approached, the mood in the barns was equal parts amusement and disdain. Cannonero 2's handlers kept to themselves, tending to their horse's cracked skin and feeding him by hand. The American press snapped photos of the underweight colt and his exhausted team, filing stories that read more like obituaries than previews. When the field paraded to the gate, Cannonero 2 drew little more than a glance. His odds on the tote board, hidden in the field, reflected the consensus. This was a horse with no business in the race, an outsider in every sense of the word. The stage was set, but almost no one in Louisville believed the story was about to change. A hot wind swept across Churchill Downs as the field of 20 loaded into the gate for the 97th Kentucky Derby. Cannonero 2, buried in the mutual field, stood in stall 15, his coat still patchy from the long journey north. The bell rang. In the first frantic strides, Cannonero 2 drifted back, swallowed by the pack. At the first call, he was 18th, so far behind that even the track announcer barely mentioned his number. Gustavo Avila, perched quietly in the saddle, kept his hands still, letting the colt find his rhythm as the favorites carved out a punishing pace up front. Past the half-mile, the leaders pressed on, but Cannonero 2 still lingered near the rear. Avila waited, eyes fixed ahead, feeling for the moment that had been rehearsed so many mornings in Caracas. Entering the far turn, he angled Cannonero 2 wide, asking for more. The response was electric. Cannonero 2 unfurled his stride, surging past horse after horse, his awkward action forgotten in the blur of momentum. The crowd, slow to notice, began to murmur as the outsider from Venezuela swept past rivals with a relentless drive. By the top of the stretch, Cannonero 2 was 4th and still accelerating. The favorites, Jim French and Bold Reason, were caught flat-footed as the bay colt thundered down the center of the track. Avila never raised his whip. Cannonero 2 stormed past the leaders, pulling away with every stride. Under the twin spires, he crossed the finish line 3 3/4 lengths in front, stopping the clock at 2 minutes, 3 1/5 seconds. In the stands, disbelief turned to roaring applause. The Derby chart would record a charge from 18th to 1st, a margin that left no doubt. For Cannonero 2 and his team, the impossible had become undeniable. 2 weeks after the Derby, Cannonero 2 stepped onto the Pimlico dirt with the eyes of the racing world fixed on him. The doubters were louder than ever. American experts called his Louisville victory a one-off, a lucky break in a weak field. Even his own odds remained long. But Gustavo Avila and Juan Arias, their routines unchanged, sent the colt out with the same quiet confidence that had carried him from Caracas. The Preakness Stakes, a test at 1 3/16 miles, offered no place to hide. The field broke sharply. Cannonero 2 settled mid-pack, unhurried, waiting for the pace to unfold. At the half-mile, he was still biding his time. Avila, hands low, felt for the moment. Then, just as in Kentucky, he angled the colt outside and asked for run. Cannonero 2's stride lengthened, his awkward gait forgotten. He swept past rivals with a force that stunned the stands. In the final furlong, no one could match his drive. The wire flashed past. The official time was 1 minute, 54 seconds flat. It was a track record. For a moment, the Pimlico stopwatch seemed frozen. The numbers confirmed what no one could deny: this was not luck, not a fluke. The timing sheet at Pimlico told the story. Cannonball had run faster than any Preakness winner before him. Even the skeptics fell silent. Headlines the next day dropped the word mystery. The Cannonball was now a record holder, his name etched beside the sport's elite. With 2 jewels in hand, the Triple Crown was suddenly within reach, and the anticipation for Belmont began to build in every racing circle from Baltimore to Caracas. Belmont Park pulsed with energy as more than 82,000 people packed the grandstand, a record crowd drawn by the hope of witnessing history. Among them were thousands waving Venezuelan flags, their voices rising in support of the colt that had already defied every expectation. Cannonball too walked onto the track carrying the weight of 2 nations and the scars of a relentless campaign. In the days before the race, his handlers and veterinarians had battled a stubborn foot infection. The fever lingered. Each gallop in the morning revealed a horse not quite right, but the team pressed on, unwilling to withdraw after coming so far. The starting gate snapped open, and Cannonball too broke well, settling into a comfortable stride. For a moment, the dream seemed alive. He moved confidently down the backstretch, even taking the lead as the field approached the far turn. But the toll of the infection and the grueling Triple Crown run became impossible to ignore. His stride shortened, and one by one rivals swept past. Cannonball too finished 4th, crossing the wire spent but unbowed. The crowd, silent at first, soon erupted into applause, not for victory, but for courage. In the aftermath, veterinary reports confirmed the severity of the hoof infection and the fever that had sapped his strength. Cannonball too's Triple Crown bid was over, but the story did not end at Belmont. Within months, his owners negotiated a sale to King Ranch in Texas. The price was $1.5 million. The $1,200 reject from Keeneland had become one of the greatest investments in racing history. Yet Cannonball Thune's true legacy ran deeper. Decades later, he remains the only horse trained in South America to win the Kentucky Derby, a symbol of possibility for every outsider, and a reminder that greatness sometimes arrives in the most unlikely form. Today, thoroughbreds sell for millions, but racing's greatest upset came from a $1,200 outsider who shattered old certainties in front of 82,000 stunned witnesses. Cannonball II's legacy endures each spring, when new contenders from unexpected places line up at Churchill Downs. The gate never closes on possibility. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts on what real underdogs still mean in sports today.